Well, welcome everybody. We are here for the STEM Orbits Ohio Design Challenge. Oh, it is not the virtual kickoff, I apologize, but it is our kickoff with our experts this evening. And we're very excited to have a panel of experts with us tonight to talk about everything Design Challenge. Our facilitators for this evening's session will be Howard Green from the Ohio State University and myself. We are going to try to be very, very quiet, which is not very easy for the two of us, but we will try to be short so that we can give as much time as we can for your questions to be able to ask the experts. This evening's session is being recorded. We hope to have it up on the OSLN webpage within about a week, so that if you do have to leave or something comes up or you have a colleague who might be interested, it will be available there for them. Our agenda for this evening from 4:30 to 4:35, we're going to give you just kind of an overview, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers with the experts, where you'll be able to ask your questions directly to the experts. Howard will cover the expert link if you'd like to access that, and how you can actually get in contact with some of these experts and have them come and work with the students in your schools, and then some deadlines and next steps, and some overall general questions about the design challenge.
You did say remotely.
Remotely, I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
expert panels remotely. Thank you, Howard.
Yeah.
Thank you,
You
Howard.
said come and work the students in your schools, and some of my panelists are like, ah.
Yeah, no, definitely remotely, definitely remotely. We're all very used to Zoom at this point in time.
Especially the ones that are out of Houston.
Well, it could be fun, but yes, it will be remotely. So Howard, if you want to share just a little bit about the Star Lab.
Sure, I can. So you've seen this image once already. This is a great artist rendering of Starlab. It's one of 3 US-based free-flying commercial space stations that will be launched here probably in 2028, but before the International Space Station is decommissioned, and not many years now. So exciting thing is it has a ground facility that will be hosted in Columbus, Ohio, and thus some of the excitement across the state of Ohio. And we are partnering with the Ohio STEM Learning Network because they have a network of STEM schools across the state, and the ability to convene them, and especially around a design challenge, which is really exciting for all of us. Oh, and I'm sorry, I should probably also mention, so Voyager Space is part of that partnership, NanoRacks as well, which is also a part of Voyager Space now. And I think I have described to some of you on other occasions this concept of George Washington Carver Science Park. So we are talking about a science park of research and development that will surround this ground facility in Columbus. George Washington Carver, a really amazing agronomist. Some of the things that we take for granted in agriculture now, he either developed or was influential in developing, and thus the namesake as an inventor and an agronomist, and very much involved in some of the kinds of work that we're going to be doing in low Earth orbit.
Thank you. All right, and then just a reminder of what our design challenge is for this year. How do we improve the health and well-being of astronauts aboard Starlab orbiting the Earth? We're asking students to develop a plan, system, or product to positively impact the sustainability of the physical and/or mental health of those living in space for an extended period of time. Areas of focus, you might have your students focus on one of these, or they can come up with their own. Design the personal quarters for multiple astronauts. Research and design the interior aesthetics of the station to promote mental health and well-being. Create an exercise routine with equipment that will promote bone density and prevent muscular atrophy. Develop sustainable, nutritious food production. And think of ways to innovate beyond what we already know about life in space. And that might include pharmaceuticals, biomedical sciences, advances in tech and engineering. Today's expert panel. And we have many experts with us today who are not on our panel, and those experts should feel free to go in or jump in as well. But Howard, I'm going to let you take this next slide and introduce the 4 experts that we have with us.
Sure thing. And I think I'm not sure we have John Trzynski on, but you know what? I'm going to let each of you just do a real quick introduction. So we'll go in the order of the folks on the screen. So Max, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, I'm sorry, John. I didn't see you earlier. Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, sure thing. So hi, everyone. My name's Max. Howard, how much detail you want me to go into? Do you want me to describe what I do?
Your 30-second version, if you have one of those.
Yeah, so mission manager. So what I do is I kind of manage the process of getting science experiments on the ground into space. A lot of times we work with universities, research organizations, professional companies, and it's my job to manage the process of getting their hardware in space, talking with the rockets, talking with safety people to make sure astronauts stay safe. So I kind of have an understanding of the whole process as a whole.
Go ahead, Chris.
Hi there, Chris Sheehan, Vice President of Engineering for Zen Technologies. We're a small company in Northeast Ohio that does spaceflight hardware for NASA. I've been there 20 years as an engineer, project manager, et cetera, and have been affiliated with about 100 payloads that have gone to the International Space Station, including some ground analogs and some things in human health and exercise countermeasures.
Thanks, Chris. Go ahead, John.
Hi, I'm John Trzynski. I'm the Research and Payloads Development Manager at the Ohio State University for the Starlab project. My experience is primarily in payload systems and payload management. My last 2 years before my time at Ohio State was in the ISS National Lab program, working payload systems and the project management of those.
Thanks, John. Courtney?
Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Shurko. I'm a project manager at NASA Glenn, close to Cleveland, Ohio. I support a lot of the work that's exploration or medical focused in the medical domain. However, I do also support the human research program. And so NASA's human research program, research is in the name, but we support a lot of scientists and researchers who are classifying or buying down risk to human spaceflight. NASA has identified 32 individual risks to the human in space. And so that's everything from medical to some others have mentioned exercise physiology, space radiation, et cetera. There's a lot of information out there about this, but really we are focused on the human and how to keep them safe and alive in space.
And thank you, Courtney.
Thank you so much.
Much better than I could have done, Sandy.
Well, and that's why I always ask, and I always pass off to somebody else because it's far better than I could do. Our protocol for tonight's session, Dr. Green and I will act as the moderators for the session. We'll start with a few questions, just overarching questions, just to get the panel warmed up and teachers to kind of get your mind flowing for questions that you might have. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, you could type it in the chat. We will try to monitor both the best that we can so that we'll be able to ask the expert that could be able to respond appropriately. Please unmute yourself when called on, if at all possible. And then if you could have your camera on. I know for some people it makes their internet run slower. We understand that as well. And we will do our best to get everyone's questions in and answered in the allotted time that we have. Any questions about the protocol? All right, so I'm just going to start with a general question to all four of you, and whichever of you would like to respond, please do so. How does your area of expertise relate to or give some insight into this year's design challenge problem? I know, Courtney, you kind of segued into this very well. Can you give, if somebody were, say, to do the exercise part, what would be something that you could lend to that?
Yeah, so exercise is something that we look at as a countermeasure to spaceflight adaptations. So, when you're on the ground, your body is in gravity. You feel those forces. So that's everything from the fluid flow, right? So that is when you're on Earth, it is natural for the fluid in your body to move all the way down to your extremities and your feet and your arms. When you move into microgravity, a lot of that fluid now is no longer being pulled to all of your extremities on your hands, and it's collecting in your chest and your heart and in your head because there's nowhere for it to go. It kind of stays close to where your heart is. One of the things that we do as a countermeasure to making sure that that fluid is flowing all the way through your limbs is exercise, right? So there are a couple different types of exercise. You have aerobic exercise. Think of the treadmill that we have on the International Space Station. But we also have resistive exercise where we are asking the astronauts to load up their weight. One thing that you might overlook when you do an exercise countermeasure is that in microgravity, you not only need to load the amount of weight that you can lift on Earth, but you also need to load up your body weight because your body weight is effectively no longer there. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're designing maybe an exercise system.
Thank you. Chris, I know you work with that typically as well. Do you have anything more to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, what I could specifically bring to this challenge is a ton of video and pictures and white papers and things of devices that we've either evaluated on the ground for exercise countermeasures or developed ourselves. So that might inspire these groups to sort of, maybe there's a leverage point where they can jump off into this challenge. We've done a little bit with, I guess, human exploration medical systems. I don't know that there's a ton there specifically that we could help with. I think the literature and just going to the NASA website is probably good there. But we've got a ton of payloads that we can share pictures and concepts and designs and all those sorts of things with the folks that are looking to work through this challenge.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Max and John, just a quick question. What do you think students might overlook, or what do you think they may need to pay special attention to while they're trying to solve this problem?
Yeah, one thing I think they might overlook is not so much what they're doing, but how they're doing it. So for instance, a piece of gym equipment, you might have a good idea of how to implement some exercise in space to target a muscle group. But what is that going to look like? What is it going to be made out of? How are you going to get it into space? Are you going to assemble it on the ground and launch it as a whole? Are the astronauts going to assemble it once it's up there? Where are you going to store it? It's a lot of these how questions that I usually deal with that get overlooked a lot of times. But it's extremely important as you're developing things for space, I think.
John, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think kind of stemming off that point, another important thing to always think about is resource use, whether that's things like flight resources, when you're thinking about size and weight for bringing whatever the system is to the astronauts. The other thing is power, water, gas resources in effect. All of those resources are relatively limited on station or in any space environment. So the most effective systems are going to be the least resource dependent, or at least the most resource efficient when it comes to recycling or anything like that in the system.
Right. Thank you so much, John. You do seem a little bit muted on my end. I don't know if that can be affected at all or not. Teachers, do any of you have any questions?
Do we get called on, or do we just ask?
No, you can just ask. Go for it.
Okay. I can't tell how many people are on here. So, Ryan. So when you're talking about these payloads, how often are they going up? And is there like a little space in each one to send pieces, or are they looking for one that we can figure out goes into 3 payloads, or is it something we split up over time? Does that make sense?
Panelists who would like to answer.
Yeah, I'll touch on it a little bit because a big part of my job is launching the payloads into space. So I guess first question I should ask is what's the size of it? There is a good amount of space on each rocket. And you go up alongside astronaut food and other vital important things that the astronauts need. And it really just depends how much space is on there. So sometimes the ISS organization might come to us and say, hey, we only have this much room for science on this launch. And then we have to fight and figure out who has the most important thing that has to go up there, right? And then our next opportunity to launch might be 6 months from then, or then a year from then. So it's really kind of it depends kind of answer. But you can definitely target most things for one launch. It's a pretty complicated thing if you're going over one launch.
Can I ask a clarified question on that, Max? So like when you're saying it
Yeah.
depends on how much space you have, so are we thinking like the size of a semi? Are we thinking the size of a dump truck? Like what is the normal size load? Like when you're talking about the food that you have to send up and everything else, like what is that in terms of like something a student would be able to visualize?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically there's two types of rockets that go to the International Space Station. There is the Falcon 9 rocket with the Dragon capsule. So you have the rocket, and then at the top of the rocket is the capsule. And SpaceX calls their capsule the Dragon. And so that's the actual thing that attaches to the space station, and then they are able to unload all their equipment. There's also one from Northrop Grumman. The rocket's called an Antares, and their capsule at the top is called the Cygnus. And those are two really common ones that we see go to the space station. And the size of them, I don't know, like a half of a semi, maybe a large loading truck. It's really hard to say. I think 100 pounds, 200 pounds on the high side, you could really get away with, but anywhere under there, if it was 20 pounds or 30 pounds, that would be fine too. I think one big consideration too would be how much volume it takes up. If it's something that really needs a lot of space, right? You might want to consider a stowed sort of configuration where it can launch up in a stowed configuration, and then you assemble it on orbit to save space in the capsules for other important stuff being sent up.
All right.
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
I think some of the teachers looking to bring math into this as well, so for a payload, the rule of thumb that we kind of just like to throw around is that it's like $10,000 per pound to launch to the space station. So the heavier your payload, the more expensive it's going to be. Also, time is money. So, yes, there is maybe an exercise routine that the crew would be doing in space while they're working. But when we do science operations, we generally try to minimize the amount of time that it takes for them to do specific activities, because there is so much general operations that have to go on all the time, right? So the crew, they still have to sleep. They still have to eat. They still have to have some personal time to maybe connect with their family or connect down to the ground to talk to their physician. They still have to have time to maintain the spacecraft. And then in the extra time that they have during the day, they use that to do science, or they use that to do research, or they use that to do other things. So don't forget to factor in time as something that you can trade off as well.
Thank you. Any
Yeah,
other
and
questions? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Please add.
just to kind of spin off that too, I think it'd be a kind of an interesting thought experiment for the students, thinking about the kind of trade-offs and efficiency between volume and assembly time. When you think of like a piece of exercise equipment, or really any equipment, you can break it down fairly small if you take it completely apart, but then you're looking at hours of reassembly. But if you leave it mostly assembled, it's going to be massive and in the way, and cause other problems. So kind of the interesting trade-off between efficiency and volume for the timing of it might be an interesting thought experiment for them.
And you, I know it was discussed at our kickoff. What is the size? Like if students are like doing an interior of looking at the interior and making it aesthetically pleasing for an astronaut to live in, like what should they be thinking about? Like what is the size constraint they have for where people live?
Yeah, so ISS is equivalent to a 6-bedroom house. Now, granted, that is split across many different modules. More than half of them are owned by NASA or the US, but there are also our international partners who have modules up there. ISS is the largest, right? So 6-bedroom house. My understanding, and Max or others can correct me if I'm wrong, is that any of our new commercial providers must be about half the size of ISS. So now you're thinking maybe a small 3-bedroom house. You know, a single room might only be at a maximum 20 feet across. It's not very large.
Yeah, I can agree with this. Actually, I had an awesome opportunity 2 weeks ago. They're starting to build life-size mock-ups of the Star Lab, and I got to walk through like a 1 level of it. And they're still playing with ideas, but I think it was something like a 20-foot diameter, and it's just a big round room, maybe 25 foot. The living quarters is like, the bedrooms are kind of like the sleeping quarters are like a large outhouse size. I don't like using the word outhouse, but I can't find another shape that would, you know, replicate that. So something like that.
Maybe a large refrigerator.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Yeah, so from the human side, right, in crew quarters, not only is that where they have to store their personal effects, but that is also where they sleep. And so, you know, when astronauts or crew members are in microgravity or low Earth orbit, they often experience 18 sunrises and sunsets. And so that really throws off your circadian rhythm, right? So one of the things that we study in the human research program is like blue light and artificial lighting and how to effectively help astronauts sleep, because when you're sleep deprived, you also don't perform very well. So imagine you now have to recover from a stressful situation, or something is going wrong with the space station and you need to be all hands on deck. We want that astronaut to be well slept, right? You know, we want them to be functioning at 100% and being able to make good decisions. So sleep is something that we focus on at NASA as well.
I think if you're looking for a footprint, we talked at one of the outreach meetings at 3 by 3 by 6. I don't know. I mean, staging it on the ISS is going to be very space challenging because not only do you have to find a space to attach it, you can't be imparting loads into this, you know, the structures. That might be a bridge too far for this challenge, but it's certainly something that, you know, just as an awareness, maybe something that people aren't thinking about. You know, when you go to do a squat on the ground, you have the earth to absorb you, or, you know, the structure that you're exercising on. If you're imparting loads into the space station, that's a whole different story.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I remember from the kickoff, I just thought it was so interesting. I think Chris was saying that astronauts don't sleep very well, and it was really interesting because you were saying that they don't have that like release when they lay down at night. It's about it. We started talking about things, and we could do research on it. But how do magnets work, like in space? Is it something that if you had some sort of magnetism, like a weighted blanket, are those the kind of things you're looking for? We were talking about ways to make it more comfortable for them. Or has that already all been thought of? Is that not what we're looking at? Or
I think, John, maybe you were the one who brought that up. And I think maybe it was on the heels of me saying that the fluid shift can be a little bit problematic when you get up there. Yeah, John, I don't know, maybe you have more to say on that.
Yeah. So to that point, yes, like they're because you don't have the gravity and the fluid shift, or for them into the gravity putting vertical stress on your muscles and bones. You don't get the kind of relief sensation of sitting down or laying down in bed at night, which is where some of the sleep problems can come from. To your point of, you know, magnets or weighted blankets or things like that to kind of, you know, constrain people. I think right now they do sleep in more or less sleeping bags, or, you know, things like that to kind of provide some of that comfort. But I'm sure there is research to be looked at. Courtney might have a better understanding of what that research might look like. But yeah, so I'm sure there is information on there, but it doesn't mean that there's not room for your students to think of novel solutions to those problems.
Other questions?
I'm curious, Sandy, maybe ask the panel. So this is really a dual challenge. We're talking about physical health, but also mental health. And I think we've skirted around this a little bit, and Courtney, I heard you referring to it. I think we talk about circadian rhythms, and obviously sleep is an important element to keeping good mental health. But are there areas that we'd say, gosh, these are still really challenges that we have with respect to, I mean, if you're in space, my wife and I have been doing a lot of watching of NASA videos, and I'm just thinking I couldn't do that for 180 days or however long the mission is, and I couldn't get along with somebody for that long. And I'm just thinking of some of these kinds of things. What are the mental health challenges that we still are working on?
Yeah, so one area or risk that we are still focusing on is that behavioral health and performance. And so that's everything from teaming. If you on the International Space Station, we never have anybody up there alone. That would be number one, very isolating, but also in case of medical emergency, right? You generally want at least a second set of hands, or in case something goes wrong, you need more people on deck. So generally, I think that the minimum we've ever had is 2. We like to try to keep at least 4 on there at all times. But sometimes there's more. This year, we actually set a record with the most number of people in space at the same time. Not all on the space station, but I think it was like 23 people in space all on the same day with the Axiom launch. So one of the things that we are focusing on, is teaming, right? So you don't want all maybe type A personalities, or you don't want all, what are different types of personalities that really work well together, and what are all those facets of personality, in order to make sure that you have someone who can be decisive in case of emergency, but then you also have people who can follow directions, or you have people who are maybe really detail oriented to do those science experiments, right? So what does a team look like? In low Earth orbit, we still pretty much have real-time communication. So we're not so much worried about delayed comm. As we start thinking about Moon and Mars, you run into those delayed communications, which really affects operations, and it really affects, current operations of how we would do things for the Moon and Mars. But for the most part, in low Earth orbit, they'll still be able to have a Wi-Fi connection, or the equivalent of a communications connection down to their family, right? So they could still have a call with their families. But the illusion of privacy is one of the other areas that, most of the times on ISS, we've been able to protect for private crew quarters. Again, as we start thinking about Moon and Mars, just due to space and volume, private crew quarters might not be possible. So those are a couple areas that we're really looking at in behavioral health and performance.
Thank you, Courtney. Is there anyone else who maybe comment on some of these aspects or different ones, mental health?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about mental health. I had an awesome opportunity with some other people at NanoRacks to go take a look at some local high school projects where they were trying to figure out how to make dice rollers for space, because they were trying to introduce human elements that they might do to entertain themselves in space. But there's the challenge of rolling dice, is, zero gravity, it never sticks. So they had a bunch of student teams coming up with different ideas to roll dice. And it was a really awesome way to kind of bring something that you would traditionally do on the ground into space, which kind of grounds you, right? And something that really stuck with me from that is some students were introducing a lot of tactile feedback, like feedback from rolling dice in these like devices that you roll dice. Because if you think about it, you could really just use a random number generator on an electric device to just randomly roll dice. But what's the fun in that? The whole point of dice is tactile feedback. So these students were introducing different types of tactile feedback to give, kind of some fun response. And it kind of gets you thinking about what's important with mental health and things that remind you of home. And so that's something you could introduce to students to try to get them thinking about with mental health.
That's a really good point. And that kind of reminds me of something I was down at Johnson 7 or 8 years ago. And, the treadmill that's on ISS, fundamentally, the astronauts are tethered to it with bungees. They're just giant rubber bands to get the same force. And they were talking for a while, because they're on this thing for an hour plus a day, of doing some kind of virtual reality type, monitor to give them maybe some sort of something else than just staring at a piece of the node. So that's maybe also something that maybe a visual component while they're exercising or doing something to break up the monotony of being in this, metal tube several hundred miles up.
Something would have an interesting thing when you think about kind of the cross section between mental health and food is also the kind of going to that feeling like you're back at home is the cultural elements of food. Is not just foods that taste good, that provide all your nutrients, that provide all your required bodily functions, but that are remind you of home or remind you of good memories, or serving your astronauts for background and like something that we had an interesting conversation about at some point was the fact that if you have 3 astronauts from 3 wildly different food cultures, you'll have to pack 3 wildly different assortments of foods if you're trying to meet those preferences. Would it make more sense to have that so that you have diversity in your palette, or would it make more sense to have 3 people on a long duration mission that all come from a similar food background, that you can pack a lot of the same things in abundance rather than have multiple different ingredients? Yeah, so kind of both that and the fact that food tasting good is important. You can 3D print a brick of protein sludge packed with every vitamin you need, but nobody really wants to eat that as compared to a nice steak dinner. And it's finding that middle ground of something that's healthy but is also tasty for an astronaut when they're who knows where, flying off into deep space.
So you just brought up steak dinner. Do they have a steak dinner at the International Space Station?
It's a good question. It depends what you consider a steak dinner. If you consider beef that has been lightly heated a steak dinner, I'm sure there are canned options brought by the Russian program, or some slightly dehydrated options. But fresh steak dinner, I don't think is usually on the menu.
And you explain, I found this fascinating about crumbs, like the different kinds of bread that you can have on the space station and why you can't have regular bread on the space station. Do you remember that conversation from the kickoff?
Yeah, so cleanliness is obviously a factor on the station. Something like crumbs that can easily mold or easily become contaminants are obviously a problem. There was the discovery at some point, I don't remember when it was in the early program, that something like tortillas or a flatbread that does not crumb as easily is far preferable to a standard loaf bread. So that's one of the primary breads, if there is one on the astronaut menu.
Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question about Space Lab. With a lot of my kids are interested in designing the crew quarters, and they wanted me to ask. We looked at the simulation on the webpage, and they wanted to know where in Space Lab the crew will be, like if they'll be in the back or in the middle. And then you already touched on the footprint. They wanted some measurements, and I think I got maybe 20-foot or 25-foot radius for the footprint. And then they wanted to know how many on average people would be in that footprint, and for on average maybe what duration.
Yeah, so I know some stuff about Starlab. A lot of it's honestly being worked out as we speak. So the diameter's been fluctuating a lot. I've heard like 14 meters. I gave an example of like 25, 30 feet in diameter. I can say currently the crew quarters are along the edge of the diameter, and they're standing vertical. Obviously space, not vertical, but if it was just sitting with the diameter on the ground, the crew quarters are vertical if you were standing it straight up. As for crew numbers, again, it's being moved around a lot. I really couldn't say. Couldn't be more than 5. Like you could assume 4 or 5 right now, I think is fine. Similar numbers, I guess, to what the ISS does.
The last kind of quasi-official estimate I had heard was a stable crew of 3 to 4 with an overlap period, so a maximum of 8 with rotating, tourist groups of 2 to 3. So I think the peak maximum was something like, could theoretically contain 10 for a very short amount of time, with an expected crew of usually 3 to 4. So similar
they
to
should,
ISS.
so they could do like 10 beds. And are you saying that the crew quarters, there would be like 1 on the left side, 1 on the right side? 2 different.
So when you're thinking about this space, it's 26-foot diameter. It's a fairly big. I mean, it's kind of your standard, I don't know, maybe classroom sized, but as a circle. So these would be kind of just like, if you had a large wardrobe that you had up against one of the walls, would be the crew quarters. So, it'd be kind of an interesting idea of like, because those are also going to be intermixed with research areas. So, it might also be an interesting thing in drawing the floor plan to be like, in one level, say 6-7 foot high, 26-foot diameter, how would you arrange it to fit the most number of beds with the most number of usable space? How would you place maybe an eating area? It's one of those mental health important things of the idea of having dinner together as a group. So, would you include a table, or would you include, somewhere where the astronauts could collectively come and sit? And would that be adjacent to their sleeping area? Would it make more sense to be somewhere else? Things like that.
So just to clarify, you're saying that the actual sleeping area, their quarter is like a pod that would have like a door that they would just go into, like a closet or a wardrobe, and that would be their space. And then they would come out of that, and that would be their general living area. Then out of there, that would also be intermixed with all of the scientific experiments, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it would just be the general area. So, you'd have your living area, and be able to go in there, get in your little cocoon sleeping bag, and then when you get up in the morning, you just pop open the door and you're out in space.
Yeah. One word at NASA we like to use is integrated or highly integrated. So we want all of our stuff to have multiple purposes if possible. So really one of the best examples I can give is, tiny houses. A lot of people should know what tiny houses are, RVs, right? So in those tiny houses, people are really innovative about how they store stuff and how they, pop up tables, or the bed folds away, or, so I would get your students thinking along the lines of tiny houses, but they're probably going to be even smaller than that, if that helps.
And then any estimate of how long people may be up there? I've got kids for the mental health.
So currently on ISS, we do an increment, which is about 6 months. So generally we send people up there, we've only had 2 to 3 crew members who've been up there over a year. And those were for special research cases. We would like to see more people up there over a year. A Mars mission is up to 3 years. So we don't know what space does to the human body over the course of 3 years. Now, granted, that would include some minimal gravity, because we are hoping to send them to the surface of the moon or Mars, et cetera. But I would say for now, a good estimate, if we keep along a similar operational timeline as ISS, it could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months.
Is there anything that needs to be recycled, or that you have an overabundance of, that needs to be repurposed, that might be an idea we could look into?
Yeah, so packaging is huge. You know, if you think of food, right? So yes, when we do resupply food to the ISS, you know, we do send up fresh fruits and vegetables on that first resupply, but those only last so long. You know, so you go back to the days of pirates, right? And like oranges are great because they last a long time and they prevent scurvy. Not that we've ever had scurvy on the ISS, but you know, medical equipment, you know, when you so my expertise is in exploration medical, and one thing that we have a really big problem as we think about minimizing and staying up there longer times is sterilization, right? Because if you go to a hospital, how many times does your nurse or your doctor put on a new pair of gloves? How many times do they throw away a tongue depressor? How many times do they, you know, throw away a Band-Aid, right? So we're looking into a lot of you know, whether it's sterilization and reuse of medical consumables, or sterilization and reuse of packaging, right? So if your food comes in a package and you rip it open, what can you possibly do with that package, or how could you recycle it? You know, it's probably not to make fuel, but anything that we can do to recycle packaging is a big problem on ISS.
I have a question, if that's okay. So I'm in the elementary level, and so I'm working with the 5th grade class, a team of 5th grade teachers. And so they are really interested in two aspects. One is the plants and the food, and then the second one are like the toys and, you know, the entertainment aspect of things. And so I'm just asking, do you guys, anybody remember this book, The Toys in Space? I'm probably the oldest one in here. So this was back in 1997. Does anybody know this book?
No, I've never seen it, but I'll add it to my read list.
Okay, well, it's a bunch of lesson play. I was hoping maybe somebody said, oh yeah, we just updated it, you know, or it's online or something. And it's a great resource, but I was hoping somebody could say that they had something that was updated. But it's basically they have and I no longer have the working because it was all on VHS back in 1997. But anyway, so they have like astronauts actually playing with these toys in space, and it shows how they interact and how they work with it. And it was pretty cool. And so I'm planning on using this with my students to see in some of the videos, but the videos that they have that are on YouTube are not the best quality, if that makes sense. But I completely understand since it was back in 1997. So anyway, that's what I'm planning on doing, and I'm hoping that will help them have a better understanding of, you know, how toys and like, because somebody was talking about rolling dice and that type of thing, and what's that like. So just a suggestion, and hopefully I was hoping to get somebody say, oh yeah, we updated that, but I'm not hearing that anywhere.
So one of the great resources that might be out there, so that DICE project was actually through a program NASA runs called Hunch, HUNCH. And so that's high school students united to build hardware. I forget the exact acronym. We just call it Hunch all the time. And so there would be past projects, and I think they also put out examples of like past winners, or you know, there's lots of different detail in those project descriptions. Some of them even have short bio videos or like PowerPoint slides of like, you know, the problem statement, what problem they're trying to solve, considerations. And so Hunch would be a great resource to kind of take a look at.
Something else is, and I'll shout out my former employer, ISS National Lab has a very extensive STEM program. I can drop their website in here. And they have a tab that's all lesson plans in various different categories. And it looks like it's everything from activities to videos to, you know, everything else that it might not be, you know, combined into one book, but it's at least a site that you can access a number of lesson plans. And then through their partners, they have, you know, other organizations that provide similar services. I can drop that in here for you.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, if there's another question.
What happens to your spit when you're in space? Like when you're asleep or when you're not paying attention? We had some fun conversations about that today.
I guess I'll take that one.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the fluid shift problem, right? So when we send a crew member up who's used to normal gravity and then we put them into space, we generally take those first 3 days that they are in microgravity and kind of account for the space adaptation sickness is what we call it. And so it is their body adapting to microgravity. And so one of the countermeasures to that adaptation is actually to start to kind of dehydrate them because all of that fluid, like I said, begins to collect in their heart and in their chest cavity and in their head. And so we don't publish a lot of pictures, but those first 3 days, crew members on ISS, they actually look very, very puffy. Because that fluid tends to collect up there. And so we like to try to dehydrate them so that they can kind of become more microgravity stable. And then their body starts to slowly adapt to that. So exactly what happens to their spit, we start to dehydrate them enough that they don't have as much spit, but that's about all I'll go into it.
Someone wrote in the chat that they watched a video that they actually have to swallow their toothpaste after they brush their teeth. Is that correct?
Yeah, the ECLS system, which is the environmental control and life support system, that's everything that does the water recycling. So it basically turns pee back into potable water, or it does the oxygen generation as well. So that ECLS system is very sensitive to what you can and cannot put in it. For females, that includes, your monthly cycle, what can and cannot go into that. So there's lots of different things that we cannot put into that ecosystem, or it will ruin it for the rest of the crew members and be catastrophic.
Amazing, the conversations we come up with, right? Thank you so much, all of the experts. We're going to take a moment now and talk about ExpertLink. And if you would like to stay with us, you are welcome to. Teachers, we're going to go through how you can actually access some of these experts to have them come visit your classroom virtually and talk a little bit more about the design challenge. Experts, you're welcome to stay with us, or you're welcome to leave if you would like.
And I do want to thank you for all of you who joined us, experts. Number one, I really appreciate you sharing these insights. They're incredible. This is being recorded, and it will be much more widely disseminated and made available to teachers, many of whom were unable to make it to this session today. So we really appreciate that. But to teachers, as you give a thanks to those who've been experts here today, actually many of them on the screen are available or are already assigned to a panel. So they would be someone who'd be coming into your classroom via remote means to answer these kinds of questions that your student teams would have. And this is what we're going to segue into right now. But I just wanted you to know before they leave our company here today, actually, so Chris is one of those, and Courtney is one of those, and John is one of those, and Max is. So my goodness, so right, it's all four of them are volunteering their time as experts for this project, and they will be on a custom panel that can join your classroom. Now, you probably like to have them 5 days a week. You won't get them that often, but you might get them once or twice a month, and really bring some authenticity and some context to the problems that your students are working on. So hopefully that will be helpful for you, and hopefully you'll also tell some of your colleagues about it. If you don't have everybody in your building working on this challenge, you may be able to get a few interested by knowing the kinds of resources that are available. So thank you, all of you, my colleagues, some of you that I still have yet to meet in person, but we've met by Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to the kickoff of this thing called StarLab ExpertLink, and we'll go forth and talk about it. Those of you who are experts, you are welcome to go eat your dinners or whatever other things you were going to do with your families. But thank you.
Howard, it's all you.
Sure. So StarLab ExpertLink. So it's a broad-based network of technical experts. Some of those these are the people that you saw on screen. Right now, I've got about 30 of them. I'm trying to expand that as rapidly as I can. Right now, we're only assigning 2 experts to a classroom, and for the simple reason that I don't have enough to give you a panel of, say, 4 or 5. I'd love to be able to do that, but honestly, a couple of folks. I'm trying to get somebody who has a lot of sort of mission experience, very much the human element, and someone maybe who's a little more on the technical side, and get those 2 elements going for you as far as this. But to assist your K-12 classrooms and working on StarLab themed projects. So as you know, the statewide design challenge for the Ohio STEM Learning Network is specifically StarLab based, and Sandy read it earlier in our session today. So it says 3 to 4 experts. Right now, that's not exactly true. It's only 2 experts, but as we get more of them recruited, we will get them assigned to existing panels and augment those panels as we can. And generally they're from, as you see, different employers. So they're not all from NASA, not all from, like you saw, one was from NanoRacks, one was from Zinn. We've got a number, and some are from universities. So the Ohio State universities, we have University of Dayton, we have Purdue University. So you'll get a real sprinkling of people from different disciplines and different careers, and hopefully bring some of that richness into the discussion with your students and in your classes. The meeting frequencies dictated by project need and the panel availability. Obviously, this is going to be during the daytime because that's when your students are going to need it, and many times they may have meetings or whatever to be in, so that all has to be worked through. It could be simple content knowledge question and answer where your students have prepared questions or you have prepared questions. It could be more formal. If you are taking a very formal approach to this and you have design reviews on certain dates, hopefully you can get your panel to participate in that for you. Could be just a feedback session. Maybe you've built a prototype of something. Maybe you've tested a prototype and you've got some results and you want to share that with your panel. So these are the kinds of things. Go ahead. So the experts, you've seen today. Most of the folks who are on the screen have some very direct experience with missions and with payloads and with that part of the industry. But as we talked about, for those of you who came to the kickoff in Columbus, there's an incredible breadth of research that goes on in low Earth orbit. And you might not even think about it. So we didn't quite get to really talking about agriculture and some of the kinds of experiments that can be run, the things that we can learn. And if we're really talking about outposts in space, well, we're going to need to learn how to grow food in a sustainable way in space. And we don't do a lot of that now. And certainly our techniques, but we're working on all of that. But a lot of other areas. Biomedical. I mean, the cost, I know Courtney, who's no longer on here, but Courtney was talking about the cost per pound. I think we were in the, didn't she say 10? Did she say 10,000? I thought it was actually getting a little lower than that. But anyway, that's dramatically lower than it was 20 years ago. So there are a lot of companies that are lining up and saying, we've got some questions. Now we can get them answered because we can afford to get them answered. And some of those are simple things. And I gave the example in the kickoff of my my dandruff shampoo, Head and Shoulders, right? Which is a colloid. It's got a suspension of this zinc compound that's in it. And that's what's good against your dandruff. But if that all settles out to the bottom, that's a problem because it takes me 7/8 of the bottle to get to the point that I have any dandruff control. And that would be a problem. Anyway, the things we can learn in space about how colloids work, it's very different. On Earth, everything is masked by this huge gravitational force. And when we get away from that, we can start studying what additives do to keep these particles into a suspension. So that sounds really simple and maybe only Procter & Gamble would want to know, but there are lots of companies that want to know what's going on and run experiments and develop products and the like in these areas that you see here. But the people who are the experts, as you see, they want to give feedback, encouragement, and support to the next generation of STEM talent. That's why they're there. It's not just sharing about, technology. So why do you need it? To link students that are engaged in design challenges, so your classrooms, and I'm assuming all of you are already registered with the Ohio STEM Learning Network to take part in the design challenge. And if you're not, Sandy can give you information on how to do that. but to link you with authentic real world expertise. That's what we're trying to do. And as I said, gosh, there are careers here that, you know, your students are probably not going to get otherwise exposed to, that could be really exciting and really motivating for them. So I'm hopeful that that happens too. Go ahead. And I think this is, you're going to take this, right?
Thank you so much, Howard. Sorry, yeah, I
no
was
problem.
muted. And some important dates. So if you are registered for the design challenge, just know that design challenge entries, if your students are going to be submitting for the state competition, need to be submitted at the beginning of January of 2024. If you're not yet registered, go to osln.org, how we help, and then to the design challenge. You will also receive our guidebook, which goes through the entire design process. So if you're new to design challenge, it's a step-by-step process. Howard has been very generous and supplied many, many links to all different types of resources that can be used to help solve this design challenge problem. Obviously, today is October 9th. We're having our expert panel. The 15th, we'll do a question and answer session just about general design challenge itself and how it works. Some of the deadlines, how do I get my entries in, etc. If you're participating in the sticker challenge this year, those entries are due December 8th. We'll have another question and answer session on December 18th. And then if you're going to hold a school showcase, you would have to have that done before you submit to the state challenge. Every school is only allowed to enter one team per grade band. So, so just know that. And teams should be 3 to 4 students maximum. So if your school has a K-5 group and a 6-8 group, then you could enter one team for each of those groups to the state design challenge. Registration closes for the challenge on January 9th. January 12th, the video submissions are need to be submitted. Then it'll be judged throughout the month of January. We'll notify the winners in February. And then the top 21 scoring teams for the state of Ohio will be invited for an in-person showcase on February 23rd. And we will announce the state winners at that time. Any questions? You can always email me. I'm always available for you. Howard and I are kind of on speed dial to each other at this point in our careers. We're happy to answer any questions at any point in time. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to be stopping our recording. Please feel free to ask any questions, or if you want to put them in the chat, you're welcome to do so as well.